Today, I'd like to share a story about creating a new category. I'd like to share a personal story of one of my first forays into the world of entrepreneurship. One of my first businesses that I was ever involved with, I was a franchise owner for an invisible fencing franchise. Now, we're all very familiar with what invisible fencing does today, but I can tell you when I was involved with them over 30 years ago, quite frankly, nobody had ever heard of it. The whole concept of, in fact, using a radio signal with a wire that acts as an antenna and a receiver that the dog wears, and then administering a tone and a mild shock to the dog was very revolutionary, and it was definitely a new category. And during those periods when I was a dealer for them, we were still covered by the patent for that, and so we were the only ones who could market that particular product. But the reason I wanted to mention that is it was certainly a challenge. We spent a lot of money on customer acquisition costs, and ultimately speaking, I was doing that as a side hustle when I was working in corporate America. And so in the evenings, I would do sales calls, and I would have a couple, I'll call them minions, that would dig ditches for me and bury the wire, and then I would go in maybe after work and then go ahead and do the final hookups and teach the owner how to train their pet for a couple days, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of what we were doing, but it was definitely a new category that hadn't been out there. Now, they asked me, the company said, listen, we can't afford to have you do a side hustle because our patent is about ready to expire and we need you to go full time. I was unwilling to do that to replace my corporate job at the time. I just couldn't live on the money that I had been making. But what came out of that was not too long after that, the patent had expired. And then after that, almost all the other companies that existed out there doing similar products all flooded into the particular market. And so what happened is what they benefited significantly. We always talk about the first mover advantage. The problem was, in our case, we did have a first mover advantage, and ultimately invisible fencing somewhat became the verb that described the whole concept of that, radio fencing type of a scenario there. But what was key here is that all those people who joined late essentially took advantage of all the heavy lifting that invisible fencing did to define that particular category, and they didn't have to do that. So they were able to go ahead and just jump right in. So a lot of times I tell my customers is just tell them, you know what, let the big guys do all the heavy lifting and just go ahead and intercept them just at the very tail end when when you can go ahead and steal their thunder after they've invested all that time and energy in building that thunderstorm.